scary, Doc, but you can't keep a good man down.
Or a machine.
Complete Robocop, the animated series, 1988. The late 80s were all about action heroes dominating the screen, and one standout character from that era was Robocop. This animated series was a hit, especially for kids who were too young to catch the R-rated movie, but still wanted to dive into the Robocop universe. The show debuted the famous cyborg law enforcement agent from Detroit's harsh streets into our living rooms in a way fit for all ages. However, it did stay true to its original theme, battling corruption in a futuristic setting. Designed by Marvel Productions, this animated remake sought to distill the core of the 1987 movie. Truth be told, Robocop wasn't just about state-of-the-art laser shootouts. It was more about a tragic hero caught between his duty, his humanity, and the corruption around him. So, if you ever feel nostalgic for old-school Robocop but don't want to revisit the full brutality of the 1987 film, give the 1988 cartoon a shot. In fact, let us help you give it a shot right now, shall we? If you appreciate our efforts in bringing you this vintage goodness, then do like the video and subscribe to our channel.
Going somewhere.
Episode 1, Crime Wave. The Detroit police respond to a burglary in progress at the OCP blood bank, where 6 men are caught stealing plasma to sell on the black market. Led by Lieutenant Hedgecock, the SWAT team surrounds the building, ready for a standoff. Inside, the burglars arm a bomb, hoping to cover their escape, but their plans are interrupted when Robocop and Officer Ann Lewis ambush them. The duo quickly subdues the criminals and safely detonates the bomb before it can cause harm. While Sergeant Reed congratulates Robocop for his swift and effective action, Hedgecock remains unimpressed, criticizing his methods. Meanwhile, Dr. McNamara, an ambitious scientist at OCP, makes his case to the company's board, arguing that Robocop is too costly to maintain. He presents his own alternative, the ED 260 project, claiming it to be a more efficient solution. However, his demonstration goes disastrously wrong when the ED 260 reacts aggressively to minor traffic infractions, causing chaos. Robocop reassured the public that order would be restored, leaving McNamara humiliated. Furious and desperate to prove himself, McNamara vows revenge against Robocop. Soon after, a violent gang known as the Vandals ransacks an arcade, leaving destruction in their wake. Seizing the opportunity, McNamara approaches the gang and enlists them to go on a citywide crime spree, hoping to undermine Robocop's reputation and sway public opinion in favour of his ED 260. As reports of crime flood in, Sergeant Reed struggles to keep up with the chaos while Robocop undergoes a reprogramming session by his lead technician, Dr. Tyler. Lewis is deeply uneasy about the process, suspecting that Tyler is attempting to strip away Robocop's humanity. When a major crime is reported in progress, Reed sends Robocop back into action. At the Metro South shopping centre, the Vandals escalate their crime spree, looting stores and causing mayhem. Robocop and Lewis arrive to stop them, but the gang, emboldened and better prepared, overwhelms them. Robocop takes heavy damage in the fight, forcing him out of commission. McNamara seizes the moment, urging OCP's CEO, the Old Man, to shut Robocop down permanently. As the police struggle to contain the Vandals, Robocop undergoes urgent repairs. Before his systems are fully restored, intelligence comes in that the gang is targeting the Federal Reserve Gold Depository. Despite Dr. Tyler's warnings, Robocop and Lewis refuse to stand down, determined to stop the crime wave. The Vandals storm the depository, crashing through the gates with a bulldozer, while Lieutenant Hedgecock berates his officers for failing to hold the perimeter. Robocop and Lewis arrive in time to intercept the gang. As the battle unfolds, Lewis hurls a smoke bomb into the bulldozer's cabin, disrupting the attackers, only to be taken hostage in the ensuing chaos. Robocop fights through the gang's assault, enduring heavy blows before ultimately gaining the upper hand. He disables the Vandals one by one and rescues Lewis before taking the criminals into custody. With the crime spree finally ended, the Old Man reconsiders his decision to deactivate Robocop, acknowledging his continued importance to the city. Despite his latest failure, McNamara refuses to back down, vowing that he won't stop until he destroys Robocop once and for all.
You don't know what you're doing. This isn't right. You know it isn't.
Don't stop, you metallic moron!
Episode 2, The Scrambler. Robocop and Anne Lewis were finally off duty and about to enjoy a rare night out when a frantic man rushed into the diner, reporting that his car had just been stolen. Without hesitation, Robocop abandoned their plans and pursued the thieves, swiftly capturing them. Back at the precinct, he handed them over to Sergeant Reed, while Anne, frustrated, argued that he was letting work take priority over everything, including their personal time. Robocop, unaffected by her complaints, simply stated that his battery needed recharging and walked away, leaving Anne fuming. Meanwhile, at Metro South Prison, an inmate known as the Scrambler sat in the cafeteria, glaring at a televised interview featuring OCP's CEO, the Old Man. As the broadcast praised OCP's influence, the Scrambler's anger boiled over. He hurled his meal at the screen, cursing the corporation and vowing to bring it down. Determined to act, he retreated to the prison's computer system, searching for a way to break into OCP's mainframe. His efforts paid off when he found the Robocop project files and, more importantly, the password needed to override them. That night, as Robocop recharged at the precinct, something unusual happened. Roosevelt, one of the technicians monitoring him, noticed an anomaly. Without warning, Robocop stood up and walked out of the station, his eyes vacant, his movements unnatural. Unaware of his own actions, he arrived at Metro South Prison and made his way to the main power grid, tearing into it with mechanical strength. The facility was plunged into darkness, setting off alarms and throwing the prison into chaos. Inside his cell, the Scrambler smirked. His cellmate, confused by the sudden power outage, asked what had happened, but the Scrambler knew exactly what was going on. Moments later, a deafening crash echoed through the block as the thick concrete wall of their cell crumbled. Robocop stood on the other side, motionless, awaiting orders. Without hesitation, the Scrambler stepped forward, thanking him for following instructions. When his cellmate attempted to join him, he pushed him aside, making it clear that this was a solo operation. With Robocop by his side, the Scrambler escaped into the night. The next morning, Robocop rebooted at the precinct with no memory of what had transpired. Dr. Tyler and Roosevelt, deeply concerned, questioned him about his whereabouts, but he insisted that he had remained at the station. Roosevelt, however, had seen otherwise. Before they could investigate further, Reed stormed in, reporting a jailbreak at Metro South. Something, or someone, had broken through the prison walls. Later, at the scene of the escape, Robocop and Anne examined the wreckage. Before he could process the evidence, an unseen force took control of his system. The Scrambler, operating from an undisclosed location, activated his override commands, forcing Robocop to leave without explanation. His first stop was a downtown bank. Patrons panicked as he entered, gun drawn. Even the criminals in the midst of a robbery were caught off guard, briefly believing he had switched sides. He wasn't working for them, though. He was following orders he could not resist. From there, he moved on to OCP facilities, systematically destroying research centers and construction sites. At the precinct, panic spread as news of Robocop's actions reached Dr. Tyler and the officers. The realization that he was committing crimes in direct violation of his prime directives sent shockwaves through the department. Dr. Tyler and Anne clashed over what was happening, while Lieutenant Hedgecock took a more aggressive stance, vowing to stop Robocop by any means necessary. Robocop reached the OCP auto assembly plant, prepared to dismantle it, when Hedgecock's strike team intercepted him. A firefight broke out, but Robocop evaded capture and continued his path toward OCP's headquarters. The Scrambler, monitoring everything from his hideout, contacted the Old Man, taunting him with the knowledge that OCP's prized creation was now under his control. Desperate, the Old Man ordered Dr. Tyler to shut Robocop down. She hesitated, knowing the risk involved, but ultimately complied. However, the Scrambler anticipated this move and counteracted the shutdown, keeping Robocop under his command. At OCP headquarters, security forces attempted to prevent Robocop's advance, but he powered through, climbing the building when necessary and eliminating the guards in his path. Eventually, he breached the top floor, where the Old Man stood waiting. With his weapon drawn, Robocop prepared to execute the command given to him. At the last moment, Anne arrived, responding to Hedgecock's distress call. She pleaded for Robocop to remember his prime directives, urging him to resist the control forced upon him. The Scrambler, still connected to Robocop's system, fought back, reinforcing his orders. The internal struggle intensifies, causing an electrical surge within Robocop's circuits. The feedback loop travelled back to the Scrambler, knocking him unconscious. With control restored, Robocop collapsed momentarily before recovering. Anne rushed to his side, ensuring he was unharmed. Now freed from manipulation, he set out to track down the Scrambler. By the time the Scrambler regained consciousness, it was too late. Robocop had already located his hideout. With no way to escape, the Scrambler was arrested and brought back to prison. Back at the precinct, Dr. Tyler reported to the old man that Robocop's system had been secured, with new safeguards in place to prevent another breach. Meanwhile, repairs on the damaged OCP facilities had begun. Despite the victory, Robocop remained contemplative, aware of how easily he had been controlled. The realization weighed on him. He was, at his core, still a machine. Dr. Tyler acknowledged his thoughts but offered no response. Anne, hoping to lighten the mood, suggested rescheduling their date. Robocop, ever pragmatic, declined, suggesting takeout instead. She accepted, knowing that while he might always be more machine than man, there were moments, however brief, when he felt almost human. Episode 3, Project Deathspore. Dr. Hijiri and his assistant had spent years perfecting Project Deathspore, a revolutionary organic cybernetic parasite designed to harness and manipulate energy. It was meant to be a controlled breakthrough in bioengineering, but containment failed. The parasite, still in its experimental stage, escaped from the lab, vanishing into the underground network of old Detroit. Hijiri knew the consequences if it reached the surface. Disaster on an unimaginable scale. Elsewhere in the city, rain drummed steadily against the roof of a parked patrol car. Officers Anne Lewis and Robocop were stationed outside a supermarket, waiting. The city's crime rate had made vigilance a necessity. Soon enough, a group of thieves burst into the store, threatening the owner. Robocop and Lewis moved swiftly. 2 were taken down within moments, but the third bolted, escaping on a stolen bike. Lewis immediately pursued. Beneath the streets, something stirred. Drawn by an insatiable hunger for energy, Deathspore twisted through the labyrinthine sewer systems. Then, as if driven by an unseen force, it surged upward, bursting through a manhole. The grotesque, pulsating mass writhed as it absorbed the energy around it, crackling with stolen power. Seeing this unnatural mass of substance, onlookers naturally screamed and scattered. Lewis caught sight of the fleeing civilians and stopped one, demanding an explanation. The fear in their eyes was unmistakable. Something had emerged from below, something alive. Robocop, already alert, took in the information and moved toward the disturbance, instructing Lewis to secure the apprehended burglars and call for backup. Arriving at the scene, Robocop found Deathspore latched onto a power source, siphoning energy with unsettling ease. The artificial life form pulsed, its form flickering as it grew stronger. He lifted his weapon, prepared to neutralize the threat, but Deathspore reacted before he could act. In a flash, tendrils of crackling energy lashed out, ensnaring him. His systems flared with warnings as his power drained rapidly, circuits slowing under the onslaught. Lewis heard the disturbance even from a distance. She abandoned her post and sprinted toward the scene. Upon arrival, she found Robocop weakened, his usually unwavering presence compromised. She opened fire, forcing Deathspore to recoil. Moments later, a squad of officers arrived under the command of Lieutenant Hedgecock. But instead of engaging, Hedgecock issued orders to stand down. The parasite, given the opportunity, recoiled and slipped away into the depths of the city's drainage system. At OCP headquarters, Dr. Hijiri stood before the company chairman, urgency written across his face. Project Deathspore was too valuable to be destroyed, he argued. It could still be contained, studied, and controlled. After a tense moment of consideration, the chairman relented, granting him 24 hours to bring the escaped entity back under OCP's control. Meanwhile, Robocop, despite his evident deterioration, was already planning his next move. His last encounter with Deathspore had left him weak, his systems strained from the attack. Lewis, observing his state, saw the risks of another confrontation. Yet Robocop remained resolute and left anyway. The second encounter came swiftly. Hedgecock and his men tracked the parasite, attempting containment, but the entity had grown more powerful, its hunger insatiable. As they struggled to control it, Robocop intervened once again, pushing through his impaired state to confront the threat. But Deathspore had adapted. It surged toward him, draining the energy out of Robocop again. As the parasite fled once more, Hedgecock turned his frustration toward Robocop, blaming his interference. The next day, Detroit prepared for a momentous event, the launch of OCP's new nuclear fusion plant, a facility designed to provide unlimited energy to the city. A symbol of progress and power, it was also an irresistible beacon for Deathspore. As expected, the parasite emerged, drawn to the reactor's immense energy output. Lewis and Robocop arrived just as Deathspore latched onto the plant, its form writhing as it fed. The fight that followed was desperate and pretty swift. Robocop, still weakened but determined, fought with calculated precision. Deathspore lashed out, but this time he was ready. He managed to shoot Deathspore down, eventually destroying the artificial parasite's inner mechanisms. As the dust settled for the day, the city of Detroit was safe once more.
Bring them for attack mode.
No kidding, Murphy!
Episode 4: The Brotherhood. At a bustling construction site in Detroit, two workers toiled under the relentless sun, their muscles aching from the day's labor. The rhythmic pounding of machinery and the screech of metal against metal filled the air. Suddenly, a malfunctioning construction robot spun out of control. Hydraulic arms lashed out violently, tearing through scaffolding and crushing anything in their path. Sparks flew as the machine, meant to aid the workers, turned against them. Meanwhile, a group of men wearing weird costumes that looked like mock-up robots watched with amusement. They were the ones responsible for the chaos, and now they sat back, grinning as their handiwork unfolded. The rogue machine soon backed two workers into a corner, its clawed appendages poised to strike. A distress call blared through the police network. Without hesitation, Robocop and Officer Ann Lewis responded, speeding toward the scene. The confrontation was swift but intense. Robocop engaged the machine, dodging its wild swings and retaliating with precise fire. Sparks erupted as Robocop's gun hit its mark, disabling its core wires. With a final sputter, the robot collapsed, lifeless. The workers were safe, but instead of relief, their expressions remained wary. One of them muttered under his breath, comparing Robocop to the very machine that had just tried to kill them. He said nothing in response, much to Lewis's frustration. That evening, Lieutenant Hedgecock sat in Snarky's diner with two of his fellow officers, enjoying a meal in the warm, greasy haze of the restaurant. As always, he aired his grievances about robots, how they were taking jobs, how they were an unnatural force in society. His contempt for Robocop was particularly sharp. One of his friends tried to reason with him, warning against siding with extremists. But the argument barely began before the television above the counter flashed with breaking news. A group calling themselves the Brotherhood had claimed responsibility for recent attacks on the city's robotic workforce. Their message was clear: humanity was growing too dependent on machines, and they intended to put an end to it, starting with Robocop. Hedgecock's mood lifted at the announcement. The Brotherhood's methods might be extreme, but their cause, in his eyes, was just. The conversation at the table was cut short as the door swung open. Robocop and Lewis entered the diner, their presence immediately drawing attention. Overhearing Hedgecock's words, Lewis bristled with anger, but Robocop remained indifferent. He was far more concerned with the new threat looming over the city. The Brotherhood wasn't just a group of disillusioned citizens. They were escalating into something far more dangerous. Elsewhere, in a dimly lit laboratory, the Brotherhood gathered around a wild-eyed scientist. The man, a genius in his own right but lacking a moral compass, unveiled his latest creation, a device designed to interfere with robotic systems, scrambling their programming and turning them into weapons of chaos. Though the main project was still unfinished, he had a prototype ready for testing. The Brotherhood wasted no time, taking the smaller device to conduct a trial run. The following day, at Bogus Burger drive-thru, a young couple sat in their car, trying to place an order. They ask for a round of burgers and fries when they're suddenly attacked by the robots serving there. These robots are under the influence of the Brotherhood's new toy. They are simply trying out the new invention before they can directly experiment on Robocop. Fortunately though, before things could escalate too quickly, Robocop arrives. He, along with Lewis, fend off the malfunctioned robots. However, just as they're done, they realise the robots within the bogus burgers are making more chaos. They immediately rush in and subdue them, but when Robocop rushes outside to track down the source of the disturbance, Brotherhood uses their new toy against Robocop. They almost manage to override his senses. His vision blurred, balance faltered, and for a brief moment he was drowning in static. Eventually, he is saved by Andy Lewis. However, she takes a hit herself. Not life-threatening, but enough to worry the cyborg heart of Robocop. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood had issued an ultimatum. If the city of Detroit didn't stop being dependent on computers and robots, they would destroy every circuit in the city using a specialized bomb. Back at the precinct, Robocop and Lewis combed through criminal records, searching for anyone capable of developing such a destructive invention. Their investigation led them to the rogue scientist behind the weapon. When confronted, he was no match for Robocop's presence and Lewis's sharp interrogation. Crumbling under pressure, he revealed the location of the Brotherhood's final act, the Natural History Museum. The duo wasted no time. At the museum, the Brotherhood was already setting up their ultimate weapon. Robocop and Lewis devise a strategy. There, they trick the Brotherhood. However, the group detonates the bomb, making it increasingly difficult for Robocop to defeat the vigilante group. But Robocop wasn't just circuits and steel. He was also a man who had once been Alex Murphy. With sheer force of will, he overcame the pulse's effects and fired a precise shot, destroying the bomb before it could inflict more damage. As the electromagnetic disruption faded, Lewis swiftly took down the Brotherhood's leader. Sirens wailed outside as law enforcement arrived. Among them was Hedgecock. As Lewis tore off the leader's mask, a stunned silence filled the room. Beneath it was Putter, Hedgecock's friend. Shock rippled through the lieutenant as to why Putter would do something like that when the whole museum was beginning to crumble. A piece of debris ricochets and falls over Hedgecock, trapping him. However, Robocop saves him and carries him to safety. But the gratitude never came. Hedgecock dusted himself off and demanded Robocop put him down, his disdain still unwavering. Murphy did exactly what he was told, dropping Hedgecock right on the pavement, and he and Lewis walked away. Episode 5. The Man in the Iron Suit. Detroit's crime rate had reached an all-time high, but Lieutenant Hedgecock dismissed the rising fears as mere exaggerations. He insisted that the city was as safe as ever, a claim that felt increasingly hollow with every new police report. Even Robocop, the city's mechanical protector, couldn't be everywhere at once. Recognizing this, Dr. McNamara proposed a bold solution, an advanced iron suit, a creation that could surpass Robocop in every way. The old man, chairman of the OCP, saw an opportunity. He cared little for the city's safety, but was always eager to invest in something that promised higher profits. Without hesitation, he gave McNamara the green light. Meanwhile, at the police training grounds, a fresh batch of recruits endured grueling exercises meant to mold them into Detroit's next defenders. Hedgecock, unimpressed by their lackluster performance, took it upon himself to demonstrate what real training looked like. With precision and determination, he completed the rigorous course in just 37 seconds, leaving the recruits in stunned silence. His moment of triumph, however, was short-lived. Robocop arrived with his partner, Lewis, and Dr. Tyler, the scientist responsible for the cyborg's ongoing enhancements. Tyler had introduced a new set of programming updates and wanted to test their effectiveness. Robocop took on the training course, clearing every obstacle with cold efficiency in under 10 seconds. Hedgecock's jaw tightened. Jealousy burned within him as the recruits murmured their admiration for Robocop. Tyler, however, remained dissatisfied. There was still room for improvement. Across town, in his lab, Dr. McNamara had finished his new prototype, a sleek, high-tech iron suit designed to render Robocop obsolete. He was eager to see it in action, to prove that his creation was the future of law enforcement. That opportunity soon presented itself. Another crime erupted in the city, and Hedgecock, eager to prove his worth, rushed to the scene. Yet, despite his bravado, bravado, he found himself quickly overwhelmed by the assailant. Just as things took a dire turn, Robocop and Lewis arrived. Without hesitation, Robocop subdued the criminal with ease. Another arrest stolen from under Hedgecock's nose. As the lieutenant's frustration boiled over, McNamara saw an opening. He approached the embittered lieutenant with an enticing proposal, an opportunity to truly outshine Robocop. The scientist unveiled his iron suit, promising that it would make Hedgecock stronger, faster, and more powerful than the cyborg. Skeptical but desperate, Hedgecock stepped inside. As the suit powered up around him, he felt an intoxicating rush of strength. For the first time, he believed he could surpass Robocop. Back at the training grounds, Robocop was undergoing another round of exercises. Dr. Tyler had refined his programming even further, determined to enhance his combat abilities. The session was interrupted by the arrival of the old man and Dr. McNamara. With smug satisfaction, McNamara revealed his new invention. He shows them the man in the iron suit and how this model is worth more than Robocop's prowess. When they realize that the person within the suit is Lieutenant Hedgecock, they're shocked. However, the old man simply wants to see which is a better product, Robocop or the man in the iron suit. So, when McNamara proposes a competition to see which robot is better, the old man instantly agrees. The competition is very simple. To win, the robots have to disable one another, and whomsoever does it first is the superior invention, and that's where OCP would invest. The battle commenced, and to the crowd's surprise, the iron suit proved formidable. Robocop struggled against its sheer power and agility, and for the first time, it seemed as though the cyborg was at a disadvantage. McNamara watched triumphantly as his creation outmaneuvered Robocop at every turn. Yet, it quickly became apparent that Hedgecock's vendetta was clouding his judgment. This was no longer about proving superiority. This was personal. With each attack, his strikes became more vicious, his anger more consuming. Lewis, watching from the sidelines, sensed the danger. She rushed forward to intervene, but was struck in the chaos, collapsing to the ground. Something shifted within Robocop. The sight of his fallen partner ignited a force within him, one beyond programming and calculation. A surge of determination took hold. He fought back with renewed strength, countering Hedgecock's every move with precision and force. Blow after blow, the tides shifted. Robocop dismantled the iron suit, rendering it useless. Hedgecock, defeated and exposed, lay at his feet. However, before he can hurt Hedgecock, Lewis stops him. Robocop finally stepped back, allowing his anger to subside. However, the verdict of the competition was clear. Robocop was still the superior protector of Detroit. The old man, ever pragmatic, made his decision. OCP's investment would continue with Robocop. McNamara's project was deemed a failure, and Hedgecock, stripped of his pride, was left to contemplate his bitter defeat. Episode 6. The hot seat. The train rumbled along the 16th line in Detroit City, its passengers unaware of the danger lurking ahead. A group of vandals, emboldened by their past crimes, hijacked the moving train, brandishing weapons and demanding money from terrified commuters. Their arrogance made them feel invincible, convinced that no one could stand in their way. But they were wrong. Robocop and his partner Lewis were already closing in. As soon as they arrived on the scene, Robocop issued a stern warning, giving the criminals a chance to surrender peacefully. Yet, intoxicated by their own bravado, the vandals laughed off the threat. Instead, they escalated the situation, taking Lewis hostage to force Robocop to stand down. It was a mistake. The moment they let their guard down, Robocop executed a calculated maneuver, bursting through the train's ceiling. With precision, he incapacitated two of the criminals, sending them crumpling to the floor. The last remaining vandal attempted to flee, but Robocop was faster, subduing him before he could escape. The ordeal was over, but something about Lewis's demeanor was off. Back at the precinct, while Robocop and Lewis processed the criminals, he voiced a concern that had been lingering in his mind. He proposed working alone. His primary function was to serve and protect. But Lewis was human, fragile in comparison. He didn't want to put her in unnecessary danger. However, Lewis overheard him and, with her usual wit, remarked on his newfound ability to show concern for others. Robocop, avoiding the conversation, simply stated that he needed to recharge. Meanwhile, all across the city, news reports once again hailed Robocop as a hero, his image plastered across every channel. Not everyone was celebrating his success. Dr. McNamara, a scientist with his own agenda, seethed at the sight of Robocop's unwavering presence, Determined to eliminate him, he set his latest invention, X376, into motion. The task was simple: break the vandals out of jail and have them steal Robocop's regeneration chair, the very device that kept his energy levels stable. The plan unfolded with brutal efficiency. X376 stormed the prison, tearing through security with ease, freeing the vandals. But their freedom came at a price. Mara demanded they retrieve the regeneration chair, ensuring that once Robocop's energy depleted, he would have no means to recharge. Back at the lab, Dr. Tyler monitored Robocop's power levels. The system showed an 82.05% charge, enough for now, but time was always a factor. Robocop, however, was restless. Crime didn't wait, and neither would he. Lewis pointed out that Detroit had survived long before he was created, but before the argument could continue, their sergeant burst in, reporting a crime in progress. Without hesitation, Robocop left, ignoring the fact that his charge was unfinished. Worse still, he didn't bring Lewis, deeming it too dangerous for her. She was livid, naturally, but the crime report was a trap. While Robocop pursued a false lead, the vandals struck the lab, stealing the regeneration chair. By the time he returned, it was gone. Lewis, realizing the gravity of the situation, urged Dr. Tyler to build a replacement, but the process would take days, time Robocop didn't have. He had mere hours before his system would shut down entirely. Despite his diminishing power, Robocop pressed on, seeking information about the vandals' whereabouts. His investigation led him to a dingy arcade, a known hideout for criminals. There, he confronted a group of lowlifes, but the ensuing fight further drained his energy. Lewis, seeing his condition worsen, pulled him away before he collapsed. Meanwhile, the vandals, rather than immediately handing the chair over to McNamara, attempted to leverage it for profit. They demanded payment, but McNamara was indifferent. As long as Robocop's system failed, he had no interest in their greed. Realizing they wouldn't get their payday from him, the vandals devised a new plan: sell the chair back to the police in exchange for free reign over the city. Robocop, growing weaker by the moment, received their call. He refused their terms, but used the opportunity to trace their location. With no time to waste, he headed straight for their hideout. Lewis insisted on going with him, but as soon as they arrived, he locked the car doors, preventing her from following. It was reckless, but he believed he had no other choice. Furious, Lewis vowed to teach him a lesson on partnership when this was over. Inside, the fight quickly turned against Robocop. His energy levels were critically low, his movements sluggish. The vandals took advantage, overwhelming him. For the first time, he found himself unable to win. Meanwhile, Lewis refused to be sidelined. Determined, she managed to unlock the car doors and rushed inside. Using her quick thinking and combat skills, she turned the tide, neutralizing the vandals one by one. In the end, she saves him. However, with the last of his energy spent, he shuts down. With the vandals subdued and the chair recovered, they return to the lab. Dr. Tyler and the team worked tirelessly, recharging Robocop and monitoring his vitals. Finally, his system rebooted, fully restored. As he regained consciousness, he took in the sight of his relieved team, and he understood even a cyborg had limitations. His insistence on working alone had nearly cost him everything. Looking at Lewis, he acknowledged his mistake. He apologized, promising never to disregard their partnership again. Episode 7. No news is good news. Media Break, one of Detroit's most trusted news channels, delivered yet another heroic tale to its citizens. Robocop had saved a woman and apprehended a criminal in the middle of a bank heist. As the citizens of Detroit took in the news with admiration, across town, the owner of rival channel KRUD News seethed. He had long envied Media Break's dominance, but what pushed him over the edge was finding his own reporter, Julio Solero, airing a segment about puppies instead of breaking news. Furious, he delivered an ultimatum. If Solero wanted to keep his job, he needed to deliver real news. News that would boost ratings, no matter the cost. Desperate to comply, Solero took a different approach. If Media Break painted Robocop as a hero, then KRUD News would do the opposite. It didn't matter what actually happened. What mattered was how they told the story. Later that evening, Robocop and his partner, Officer Lewis, stopped by Snarky's Diner for a meal, a rare moment of respite in their line of work. As they sat in their booth, the din of the restaurant was momentarily overshadowed by the television hanging in the corner. Crud News had gone live, distorting the details of the bank robbery, twisting Robocop's actions to make him seem like a brutal machine rather than a savior. Lewis was livid at the blatant lies. They immediately switched the channel to Media Break, where a different story unfolded, one about Axis Industries and its latest technological marvel, the AW-47 tank, said to be the most advanced of its kind. But not everyone was impressed. Watching from afar, Dr. McNamara, the embittered inventor of a competing project, simmered with jealousy. The praise lavished on the AW-47 stung like a personal insult. It should have been his creation receiving accolades, not this tank. Fueled by resentment, he took matters into his own hands. That night, he snuck into the Axis Industries facility and reprogrammed the AW-47, ensuring that it would view every living thing as an enemy. He left the facility with a sinister smile. By the time the AW-47 was tested, it would unleash chaos upon the city. Later that night, the AW-47 was paraded through Detroit, causing terrible destruction. Reports flooded in the precinct. Just as Robocop and Lewis returned after their recent mission, the tank had gone rogue, identifying civilians as hostiles. Robocop and Lewis were among the first responders, racing to prevent a catastrophe, but they weren't alone. Solero and his cameraman followed closely, eager to capture exclusive footage they could later manipulate to tarnish Robocop's reputation. As the AW-47 wreaked havoc, a young boy skated blissfully through the streets, unaware of the danger looming ahead. In an instant, the tank's turrets swung in his direction. The boy froze. Before he could react, Robocop charged forward, snatching him up just in time. He rushed the boy to safety, ensuring he was unharmed before returning to the fray. But while Solero's camera caught every moment, he had no intention of showing the truth. Instead, he framed the footage to make it appear as though Robocop had fled the battlefield out of fear. Meanwhile, the AW-47's rampage led it to Detroit's Park, where Lieutenant Hedgecock and his team attempted to contain the threat. Convinced he could handle it alone, Hedgecock stepped forward, only to find himself in the direct path of a powerful laser blast. In a split second, Robocop lunged, shoving Hedgecock out of the way and taking the hit himself. Lewis quickly pulled him to safety, but the AW-47 had already recalibrated. Robocop was now its primary target. The chase began, with the rogue tank pursuing him through the streets of Detroit, leaving a trail of destruction in its wake. Solero wasted no time spinning the story. On KRUD News, he painted Robocop as the cause of the devastation, claiming that his very presence had provoked the AW-47 into going rogue. But not everyone was willing to buy into the deception. The young boy Robocop had saved knew the truth, and he wasn't about to let lies tarnish the reputation of his hero. Determined, he grabbed his own camera and decided he would capture everything that KRUD News refused to show. Robocop lured the AW-47 inside a facility where the confined space gave him the advantage. Using his strategic programming and sheer resilience and a little help from Lewis, he managed to disable the tank, ensuring it could cause no further harm. Meanwhile, Solero continued his manipulation, carefully editing his footage to paint Robocop as reckless and irresponsible. But the young boy had the real story. His footage told a very different tale, one of selflessness, heroism, and truth. He handed his tape over to MediaBreak, who wasted no time broadcasting the unedited reality. The people of Detroit saw everything: how Robocop had saved Solero, Lewis, how he had put himself in harm's way to protect the city. The fallout was swift. Furious at the damage to his station's reputation, the KRUD News owner stormed into the newsroom and fired Solero on the spot. The disgraced reporter slunk away, his attempt to manipulate the truth exposed for all to see.
Drop your weapon.
One more move and she gets it.
Episode 8, Night of the Archer. Robocop and Lewis were on routine patrol when an emergency signal interrupted the quiet hum of the city. A break-in had been reported at OCP's meat packaging unit. Someone had been stealing food. Expecting petty criminals, they rushed to the scene. What they found was something far stranger. Amid overturned crates and scattered supplies stood a lone figure dressed in a green tunic and a mask, gripping a bow. The sight was almost theatrical, as if the man had stepped out of the story of Robin Hood. The officers moved to apprehend him, but he was fast. Too fast. Arrows flew, not to harm, but to misdirect, buying him precious seconds. Before Robocop could close in, the thief disappeared into the night, leaving behind only the baffled officers and the lingering sense that this was no ordinary criminal. Later, at Snarky's diner, the precinct gathered for a meal while the news played on an old television in the corner. Reports of a masked vigilante calling himself the Archer had already begun spreading across the city. He was robbing OCP warehouses and redistributing the stolen goods to the impoverished citizens of Detroit. Food, medicine, supplies, all appearing in the hands of those most in need. The city embraced him almost instantly. In the streets, murals of the Archer were painted on crumbling walls, and street vendors peddled shirts and pins with his emblem. The poor saw him as a symbol of defiance against corporate greed, a hero who gave them what the system never would. But Robocop remained unconvinced. Justice was not a matter of spectacle. Criminals always had justifications, but the truth was rarely as noble as it seemed. Security was tightened across OCP's warehouses, and extra patrols were stationed to prevent further thefts. Yet the Archer struck again, this time at a medical supply facility. Lieutenant Hedgecock and his men were first to respond, but the vigilante evaded them effortlessly, slipping away into the shadows with crates of stolen medicine. By morning, those same supplies had found their way into the city's struggling clinics, given freely to those who had long been forgotten. Public adoration for the Archer swelled. His image spread further, his legend growing stronger with each act of defiance. Even within the precinct, his influence was hard to ignore. His monogram appeared on posters, his name on the lips of civilians and officers alike. Some, even those in law enforcement, saw him as a necessary force in a city drowning in corruption. But not everyone was so enamored. Lieutenant Hedgecock, growing increasingly frustrated, saw nothing more than a criminal making fools of the police. Robocop agreed. The Archer's methods were too calculated, too precise. His actions weren't just about helping the poor, they were about making a statement, and that suggested a bigger agenda. Elsewhere in the city, Walter Maddox, CEO of Consolidated Dynamics and OCP's biggest corporate rival, appeared on television, condemning the Archer's actions. He argued that lawlessness could not be tolerated. The next attack was bolder. The Archer struck an OCP-owned shopping mall, and this time, civilians actively shielded him from capture. By the time the police arrived, the crowd had already turned against them. Objects were hurled, paths were blocked, and the officers found themselves outnumbered. The scene quickly spirals out of control. Amid the chaos, the Archer vanished once again. The police were left to wrestle with an angry, emboldened crowd, and for the first time, even those who had sympathized with him began to question the consequences of his actions. What had started as defiance was turning into outright rebellion. Violence escalated. A mob attacked a restaurant where OCP's CEO was dining, vandalizing the establishment and destroying his car. Police arrived to disperse the rioters, but by then, the damage had been done. Tensions rose further, and the city teetered on the edge of total upheaval. At the same time, behind closed doors, Maddox once again pressed OCP's board to sell, offering to buy the corporation outright. His timing was too perfect. Every act of destruction weakened OCP's public standing, destabilizing its power. There was a pattern to it. None of this was random. The final blow came when an OCP oil refinery was attacked. This time, it wasn't just a robbery. It was an outright assault, meant to inflict lasting damage. But Robocop and Lewis were ready. While the mob created chaos, Robocop moved with precision, predicting the Archer's path, cutting off his escape routes. Lewis flanked him, anticipating his tactics. There would be no more disappearing acts. The fight was swift and decisive. Within minutes, the Archer was on the ground, subdued. And when the mask was removed, the truth was revealed. Walter Maddox, the man who had so publicly condemned the Archer, had been behind it all along. He had orchestrated the thefts, the riots, and the growing unrest, not for justice, but to cripple OCP, forcing them to their knees so he could buy them out at their weakest. The people who had worshipped the Archer as a hero had been pawns in a corporate war. When the truth came out, the city reeled. The legend of the Archer collapsed in an instant, leaving only the bitter realization of how easily desperation could be manipulated. The streets that had once been filled with his name fell silent. Greed was a far more pervasive emotion than anyone could ever comprehend. As the dust settled, Robocop and Lewis, along with Hedgecock, the sergeant, and a few other officers, are having a quiet meal at the Snarky's diner. At that moment, through a televised announcement, OCP announced that the entire ordeal with the Archer revealed how much they needed to do something to help the poor and impoverished. So, henceforth, a part of the interest of the police pension would be put in a fund to help those who need it, an idea that was the brainchild of none other than the Robocop.
Mer än så här klarar den inte.
Episode 9, Rumble in Old Detroit. The night was long and the work never seemed to end. Robocop and Officer Lewis had just completed another bust, this time an illegal weapons smuggling operation. They hauled the confiscated arsenal back to the Metro West police station, where Sergeant Parks was waiting. But as Robocop and Lewis locked away the weapons, the sergeant's mind was elsewhere. The city's growing problem with teenage gangs was bad enough, but something more personal weighed on him. His nephew Dirk had been asking him to go to a ball game. It was something simple, something normal, but being an officer meant long hours, endless responsibilities. There was never enough time. Dirk, of course, was disappointed. More than that, he was hurt. He had spent most of his life feeling like an outsider, ignored by classmates, ridiculed for his disability. Now, even his uncle, a man he looked up to, seemed too busy for him. In his mind, the reason was clear. It wasn't just about work, it was about him. Robocop had been watching. He understood all too well what it meant to feel different, to struggle against limitations others didn't have. He believed he could help Dirk, maybe give him a sense of belonging. But Robocop wasn't the only one paying attention. Gino, a newly released member of the Assassins, a dangerous teenage gang, had overheard the conversation. He had a different idea for Dirk's future. That night, Gino approached Dirk with an offer. He knew people who wouldn't care about his disability, people who would treat him like one of their own. Dirk hesitated at first, but the promise of friendship, of finally being accepted, was too tempting. He let himself be led into the gang's circle. It felt good to belong, even if he wasn't sure what it would cost him. The Assassins wasted no time in putting their new recruit to the test. If Dirk wanted in, he had to prove himself. The task? Steal the access code to the police station's evidence storage unit. It was a small thing, they assured him. Harmless, just a game, and they needed him. They weren't like the others. These people actually wanted him around. It was the first time in a long time that he felt wanted. So he did it, and it worked. The gang broke into the station, securing a stash of high-powered weapons. But then, an alarm blared through the building. Officers sprang into action, their training taking over as they rushed to confront the intruders. But when they arrived, they weren't looking at hardened criminals. They were looking at kids with deadly weapons. The Assassins didn't hesitate. They opened fire, forcing the officers to retreat as they threw a gas bomb to cover their escape. The station was in chaos, but Robocop and Lewis were already on the move. They had to stop the gang before more damage was done. Hedgecock, always eager to sideline Robocop, agreed to let them handle it, at least for now. Meanwhile, the Assassins had targeted the Slammers, a rival gang. The stolen weapons gave them an edge, and they intended to use it. But as they prepared for the fight, Dirk's excitement had faded into unease. He had never wanted this. This wasn't what he had signed up for. When he tried to back out, the truth came out. They had never been his friends. He wasn't one of them. He was just a useful tool. Gunfire echoed through the streets as the Assassins fired their guns. Robocop arrived just in time, moving through the chaos with unwavering precision. He didn't hesitate. He couldn't. The Assassins fired at him, but their weapons were no match for his armor. Lewis moved in alongside him, cutting off escape routes. The gang gave in, one by one, taken down and cuffed. Hedgecock and his team arrived just as the last of the Assassins were subdued, but one of them wasn't ready to surrender. Dirk found himself grabbed, a human shield between the gang and the cops. It was GD, a member of the Assassins' last desperate attempt at escape. Robocop and Lewis pursued as Dirk's captor dragged him into the subway, running deeper into danger. The underground tracks stretched ahead of them, disappearing into darkness. But Robocop noticed something else. Somewhere near the OCP restricted holding, the tracks were broken. The train was coming fast. If it hit the brake, it would derail. Dirk would be caught in the wreckage. Robocop calculated his options. There weren't many, so he did the only thing he could. Bracing himself, he stepped onto the tracks, digging his feet into the ground as the train barreled toward him. The impact was immense, metal screaming as he fought against the momentum. Sparks flew, but he didn't let go. Inch by inch, the train slowed until finally it came to a stop. The danger had passed, but the damage was done. Dirk had survived, but he had lost both of his legs. For a long moment, there was only silence. Robocop knew what Dirk would feel once he woke up. He had once been like him, whole, normal. Then he wasn't, but he had found a way forward, and he knew someone who could help Dirk do the same. Dr. Tyler worked fast. The new braces were state-of-the-art, designed to help Dirk walk again. It wasn't the same as before, but it was something, a second chance. As the dust settled, Dirk had changed. He had made mistakes, but he had survived and learned from them. Now, he had a new goal. One day, he would be a cop, just like his uncle.
Flyktmanöver.
Episode 10. A Robot's Revenge. Dr. McNamara stood in his dimly lit lab, eyes gleaming as he watched his beloved invention, Ed 260, power up. Before him stood a decoy resembling Robocop, its metallic frame gleaming under the lab lights. With a pulse of energy, a laser blast shot from Ed 260, obliterating the decoy in an instant. McNamara smirked. If his creation could do this to an imitation, it could just as easily take down the real Robocop. But before he could relish the moment, the doors to his lab burst open. Two men stormed in, their presence heavy with menace. One of them, a sharp-eyed man named Zindal, stepped forward, demanding the free reign of Ed 260. They had a target in mind, but before they could get to him, they'd have to eliminate his bodyguard, none other than Robocop himself. McNamara hesitated, but as their threats grew sharper, he realized he had no choice. Perhaps, he thought, this was an opportunity rather than a setback. Meanwhile, Robocop and Officer Lewis had their own mission. They had been assigned to protect two Middle Eastern dignitaries, Prince Zoras and Ilmar, who were set to sign a fragile peace treaty. There was no love lost between the two men, their mutual distrust palpable. Lewis could feel the tension in the air, though Prince Zoras seemed more preoccupied with charming her than worrying about politics. His relentless flirting was met with amusement and mild irritation, more so from Robocop, though he'd never admit it. The fragile truce shattered when Ed 260 arrived, a mechanical force of destruction tearing through the conference hall. Chaos erupted. Zoras immediately blamed Ilmar, their mistrust threatening to spiral into violence. Outside, Lieutenant Hedgecock and his unit desperately tried to hold the machine back, but their weapons barely scratched it. Sensing imminent danger, Robocop charged into the fray. The battle was brutal. Ed 260 was stronger than expected, its sheer power overwhelming. A devastating blow sent Robocop crashing beneath a mountain of debris. Hearing the commotion, Lewis rushed outside, only to find herself in the machine's crosshairs. However, Robocop disentangles himself from the debris and saves Lewis just in time. Determined to keep the dignitaries safe, she ushered them into a car. Zoras, ever the opportunist, took the opportunity to flirt more, his confidence unwavering even as destruction loomed. Lewis found it almost flattering, if not entirely inappropriate for the situation. Then, with an ear-splitting roar, Ed 260 re-emerged, its hulking frame tearing through the street as it zeroed in on the fleeing car. The police fired everything they had, but it wasn't enough. Just when it seemed like all hope was lost, Robocop, battered but unbroken, arrived. He launched a precise, calculated assault. Within minutes, Ed 260 was nothing more than smouldering wreckage, but the threat wasn't over. Back at McNamara's lab, a second Ed 260 stood ready. Zindal deployed it immediately. As Lewis and Hedgecock secured the dignitary's safety, Lewis defied Hedgecock's orders. She quickly ran to aid Robocop. The second machine was just as formidable, but this time, Robocop was prepared. After an intense fight, he destroyed it, leaving nothing but twisted metal in its wake. With the machines defeated, Robocop traced the operation back to McNamara's lab. The doctor, desperate to prove he wasn't a willing participant, revealed the truth. Zindal was on his way to assassinate one of the dignitaries, hoping to ignite a war that would benefit his own country. Wasting no time, Robocop and Lewis rushed back to the conference, arriving just in time to stop the attack. As the dust settled, Zoras and Ilmar realized they had been played. Their hostility faded into wary understanding, perhaps even the beginnings of an alliance. Later, in an almost surreal moment, Zoras turned to Lewis with a proposition to go with him and be his wife. He offered her a princess's life, a life of luxury. For a fleeting moment, Lewis considered it, just long enough for Robocop's circuits to register something dangerously close to jealousy. But the fantasy was short-lived. When she learned that polygamy was a norm in Zorus's homeland, she politely declined. She wasn't disappointed though. If anything, she relished the moment to tease Robocop. She smirked and remarked how he got awfully worked up over Zorus's proposal, while Robocop tried to brush it off by saying he didn't want to lose a competent police officer. Lewis wasn't buying it. Somehow, she knew better.
I can't see him anymore.
Episode 11, Into the Wilderness. It was supposed to be a simple flight to Los Angeles. Officer Ann Lewis, Dr. Tyler, Lieutenant Hedgecock, and Robocop were all aboard when things took a turn for the worse. Hedgecock, never one to hide his disdain for Robocop, made his feelings abundantly clear once again. But before anyone could react, the plane began to shake violently. Something had malfunctioned. In the chaos, Robocop acted swiftly, ensuring that Lewis, Tyler, and even Hedgecock made it out safely. He was the last to leave, but the plane spiraled out of control before he could jump. It crashed with him still inside. His cybernetic armor absorbed most of the impact, but the force knocked him unconscious. When he finally opened his eyes, a blonde woman hovered over him, concern etched across her face. She introduced herself as Claire, an environmental biologist. She had found him at the crash site and brought him back to her secluded cabin, tending to his injuries. The moment Robocop revealed his identity, Claire's eyes widened in recognition. He was a legend, even out here. Meanwhile, back at the crash site, Lewis frantically searched for any sign of Murphy, but there was nothing, not a single clue to where he had gone. At Claire's cabin, Robocop took in his surroundings. Towering trees, lush greenery, the soft rustling of leaves. It was a sight unlike anything he had ever seen before. He admitted as much, and Claire wasn't surprised. Places like this were becoming increasingly rare. She explained that her research focused on preserving what little of the natural world remained, but even this stretch of wilderness was under threat. To illustrate her point, she led Robocop to a nearby river, its once clear waters now tainted with pollution. They followed the contamination upstream, leading them straight to an OCP-restricted area. Something was happening here, something big. Determined to uphold the law, Robocop confronted those responsible. He arrested a man named Edward for environmental violations, but another worker, Ralph, had no intention of stopping their project. Instead, he saw Edward's arrest as an opportunity to take control. Wasting no time, Ralph contacted the CEO of OCP, who coldly instructed him to handle the situation. Taking that as a green light for drastic measures, Ralph set his sights on eliminating Robocop. Meanwhile, Lewis, Tyler, and Hedgecock finally tracked Murphy's location to an empty cabin in the woods, Claire's cabin. Their relief at finding a lead was tempered by the knowledge that the cabin was utterly empty. Out in the wilderness, Robocop and Claire were transporting Edward back when disaster struck. A towering, relentless machine from the construction site, a Ravager unit, was deployed to stop them. The mechanical beast pursued them with unrelenting precision. Robocop, despite his formidable combat skills, was struggling. His battery levels were dangerously low, and he needed to recharge immediately. They devised a plan to reach the nearby dam's power station, but the Ravager remained on their heels. With every attempt to lose the machine, it adapted, countering Robocop's every move. Eventually, it seized control of him and dragged him away, leaving Claire stranded. Determined not to let Robocop fall into the wrong hands, Claire rushed back to her cabin, where she found Lewis, Tyler, and Hedgecock. Without hesitation, she relayed everything that had happened. The three women sprang into action, their shared determination uniting them. Together, they stormed the construction site just in time to stop Ralph from harming Robocop beyond repair. As Lewis and Tyler worked quickly to restore Robocop's power by rushing him to a power source, Hedgecock found himself face to face with Ralph. Rather than intervene, the lieutenant stood back, eager to see Robocop fail. But his expectations were soon shattered. With a surge of energy, Robocop was back on his feet. He made quick work of the Ravager, targeting its video screens before letting it tumble. The machine crumbled, its threat neutralized. Meanwhile, Ralph's schemes came to a fitting end. The old man, CEO of OCP, made an appearance, but not to defend Ralph. At first, he berated him for trying to eliminate one of OCP's most important projects. Then, he made it clear that any environmental crimes would fall solely on Ralph's shoulders. No paperwork bore the signatures of anyone higher up. Ralph had been set up to take the fall, and now there was no escape. With justice served, Robocop placed Ralph under arrest. But before he left, he turned to the old man with a warning. OCP may have created him, but that did not mean he would ever turn a blind eye to their misdeeds. If they broke the law, they would face the consequences, no exceptions. Episode 12. Menace of the Mind. Cases involving the zip chip collar had reached an all-time high. Another high school student, desperate to keep up with the overwhelming syllabus, had fallen victim to the device. His mind left completely fried. Marketed as a revolutionary tool to enhance cognitive efficiency, the collar promised students an almost robotic ability to process information. But beneath its appealing veneer lurked something far more sinister. The collars were illegal throughout Detroit, yet they continued to flood the underground market. The police had been trying to track their source for months, but the true location of production remained a mystery. A recent breakthrough, however, revealed that one of the key components in the collar was a biochip manufactured by Omni Consumer Products, OCP. When pressed for a statement, the company's CEO, known simply as the Old Man, refused to comment on any alleged involvement. His silence, to the public and the police alike, spoke volumes. Was corporate greed outweighing public safety once again? Unwilling to let OCP's reputation be dragged through the mud, the Old Man reached out to the Metro West Police Station. He made it abundantly clear that he wanted answers, and fast. Under his directive, a police raid was planned at the dockyards, a known hotspot for smuggled goods. If shipments of OCP materials were being hijacked for illegal production, this would be the place to find proof. But what they discovered was far more deadly than they had anticipated. A sleek, state-of-the-art aircraft emerged from the shadows of the docks, unleashing a torrent of gunfire. Officers scrambled for cover, but many fell under the relentless assault. Robocop arrives just in time to engage, but as he pursued the aircraft, he came face to face with a ghost from his past, Clarence Boddicker. Time stood still. The man responsible for Alex Murphy's brutal transformation into Robocop was alive. The shock cost Robocop a critical moment, allowing Clarence to fire a well-placed shot that sent him crashing to the ground. By the time he recovered, Clarence had vanished into the night. In the aftermath of the disastrous raid, OCP wasted no time reinforcing the depleted police force. The CEO personally announced the arrival of 3 new officers, Ace Jackson, Wheels Wilson, and Birdman Barnes. Their orders were clear: bring order back to the streets and assist Robocop in shutting down the zip chip operation. Meanwhile, within the dimly lit halls of the Metro West precinct, Dr. Tyler worked tirelessly to bring Robocop back online. The damage was extensive, but not beyond repair. As he lay in a powered-down state, his mind was plagued by vivid nightmares of Clarence, the past clawing its way to the surface. When he finally jolted awake, Officer Ann Lewis was at his side, grounding him in reality. Determined, Robocop wasted no time marching out of the precinct. His focus was singular: Clarence Boddicker had to be taken down. Though he insisted it was a matter of duty, Lewis wasn't convinced. There was something personal in his urgency, something deeper than just enforcing the law. Meanwhile, Dr. Tyler introduced the team to her latest creation, the Robocopter. It was a cutting-edge aircraft, specifically designed to aid them in their pursuit. Without hesitation, Robocop and Lewis took to the skies, tracking Clarence's movements. As they flew, Lewis pressed him on his nightmare, and he eventually told her about his accident. She could see it plainly. This wasn't just about justice. This was about closure. Robocop had always been unwavering in his mission to protect and serve, but for the first time, there was something else driving him: revenge. On the ground, Jackson, Wilson, and Barnes found themselves locked in a brutal skirmish with Clarence's forces. The man was as reckless as ever, raining destruction without hesitation. When he lined up a shot to take out Barnes, Robocop arrived just in time. A precise shot sending Clarence reeling, but once again, he slipped away before Robocop could lay hands on him. Realizing Robocop had saved their lives, the new recruits pledged their loyalty to the mission. Together, they tracked Clarence's operation back to its core, Delta City. The pieces were finally coming together. Armed with intelligence and strategy, the team set out for the final confrontation. Deep within Delta City's industrial sector, a fight ensued. Clarence fought ruthlessly, but Robocop moved with relentless precision. As he finally stood before Clarence, his mind was slipping back to the past. Flashes overwhelmed him. Murphy, bloodied and broken, begging for mercy that never came. The ghost of that moment haunted him, whispering for retribution. His gun was drawn, the trigger half pressed. But before he could pull it, Lois stepped forward. She urged him to reconsider, but the weight of her presence alone was enough to calm him down. He remembered he was not just a machine. He was not just Murphy. He was Robocop, and he had a duty greater than personal vengeance. Instead of a bullet, he delivered cold justice, cuffing him and tossing him into the back of a police vehicle. The law would judge Clarence Boddicker. That was the line Robocop would not cross. As the dust settled, the mission was complete. The zip chip operation was dismantled, and Clarence Boddicker was finally behind bars. Robocop had walked the edge of his humanity and returned, reaffirming what truly set him apart from the machine parts that composed him. With that, the Robocop 1988 series came to an end. Originally, there was supposed to be an episode 13, but the budget that was allotted for it was used up for another production by Marvel. However, these 12 episodes were far more fetching than Robocop Alpha Commando 1998. This version of the Robocop narrative thought it was a good idea to bring the cyborg cop back, only this time with more gadgets, a lighter tone, and a lot of questionable creative choices. It obviously fell flat with the long-term fans of the Robocop corpus. Fans felt it was a watered-down attempt to market Robocop as a generic kids' action hero. But Robocop, the animated series, 1988, remains an intriguing piece of Robocop dynamic. While it's no substitute for the original film, fans praised it for staying true to the spirit of its source material. However, critics pointed out that even though the animation quality was decent for its time, it didn't push any boundaries which were expected of a dystopian world. Today, people remember this 1988 series as a pretty solid, though brief, effort to introduce the dystopian cybercop to a fresher crowd. It may not be the ultimate Robocop experience, but it shows that even the toughest action films can be turned into Saturday morning cartoons, sometimes in an astonishingly fun way. Do subscribe to our channel for more of this cartoon awesomeness to continue.